at the Magical Thread Studios in the Parlor. The Parlor is the bar on. Yes, no, exactly. You could lay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I was very young.
Yeah, yeah. Well, welcome to the podcast, Stephen Maing. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I have some notes. I did come prepared with notes. I do sometimes, but then I find that when I write the notes, I actually don't need them once I get going.
Right.
On the podcast.
Well, we could just riff, we'll freestyle.
We could.
I should start off. I'm a huge fan of your work because when I think I was mentioning earlier, when I did my first short, I think it was in 1999 or 2000. We were trying to look for a place, a way to figure out how to put it out, and we had no idea like what a film festival even was, and how they worked. And we found your book, The Survival Guide to Film Festivals, and that just unleashed a magical journey of short film festival screenings, and it was a very giving book that just helped guide us so much. And now, decades later, it's cool to sit here with you.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know. I gotta learn to take a compliment. I don't wanna make the podcast about me. I really wrote the book as a way to help filmmakers like yourself, just to get the basic info out there, because I found this is true also a lot, not so much with documentary filmmakers or short filmmakers, but a lot of people keep information close to the vest, right? They don't want to share it. And I'm all about, I found a way to do this. We should just do this, and everyone should know about how to do this. I think that was my whole idea behind that book, was to help the filmmakers whose movies I saw, which I thought were great, but they weren't particularly savvy about business aspects, or they didn't think strategically about what they were trying to do. But boy, today we're here to talk about your film Crime and Punishment, which is opening. Well, it's going to be on Hulu, but it's also, you're doing special screenings throughout September, October. I noticed on the website.
Yeah, IFC Films is doing a limited release on the 24th of August,
right,
and then a wider release starting 31st.
And then special screenings scheduled, and you can get all that info on the website. But looking at your resume, your filmography, you've made quite a few films. Previous to Crime and Punishment. And Crime and Punishment, maybe we can talk a little bit about your previous work before we get into Crime and Punishment, which I told you I was at that screening at Sundance, which I thought was a real moment.
Yeah, that's really nice that you came out for that. It was I got to say, the anxieties were really high for the film team, all of our participants in the film, and nobody knew what to expect after over 4 years of making this film. So that moment that you happened to be at was, I think, a very catalyzing one, where after years of kind of like sacrifice and dedication to trying to not just fight the battle that these cops in the department were fighting, but share and give of themselves to the film, which is in and of itself such a a leap of faith, that it all of them came up to me afterwards, after all the reactions they were getting at the Q&A, and later on, that they really finally understood what documentary is capable of.
Well, we should talk about a little bit a background about the subject, which is these group of officers that complained about, and in this suit regarding quotas, and the quotas there seemed to be racial bias in these quotas.
That's right.
And it's something that I was aware of, the news story about it, because it did turn up on the news several times. But you really tackled the topic, because I have to find out how you were able to do this. There are conversations that are filmed where people are just afraid to even be a part of the project. So how did you gain the trust of all of your subjects in the film, which are NYPD police officers who were involved in this suit, fearing for their jobs and their advancement in their jobs and wanting to have some integrity in their work, yet, wanting to bring up a very serious issue, which is racial targeting certain groups and having a quota for a number of arrests that an officer must do in a month. The amount of detail that you cover in the doc's amazing, but the way it was done in such a personal way, I found incredible. So how did you gain their trust?
Sure. Well, just like a minor correction, none of the subjects talk in the film about not wanting to be part of the project or being fearful of that.
But they were fearful. They were fearful of
the idea of coming forward. What we always told them, and I let them know that we wouldn't release this film for years, and I thought it might be 4, 5, 6 years until this saw the day of light. So in a lot of ways, once we got their vote of confidence, they kind of forgot that a film was even being made.
Right.
The way we gained their trust really was just demonstrating that we were going to come back, and that I tried to show up as often as I could to every event whenever they called me or I heard that something was happening. And I think that sort of demonstration of commitment and like the endurance, like this idea of just sort of it's an endurance race that really won them over. This was actually also the fourth project that my producing partner and I had done about NYPD policing and the issue of quotas. And we had looked closely at the stop and frisk issue and had done slightly more journalistic, visual journalism projects about it for some publications and a 1-hour piece. And essentially a couple of cops who were our anonymous silhouetted sources basically decided as the years went on that they were frustrated that things weren't getting better. And in a lot of ways, they thought things were getting worse. And so they were ready to speak out, be more transparent. And coming from like a observational, filmmaking background, rooted in a like very intimate character-driven storytelling, in a fiction and nonfiction sort of sense, I was really struck by this opportunity, to ask them, hey, what do you think about doing like a long form project where we track your whole process of essentially becoming a whistleblower? And they were game.
And it's interesting because the way that it's shot, you also shot most of the film.
Yeah, right? That's right.
And it looks beautiful. It looks like it's shot in a way it felt like a narrative feature at times.
Oh, thank you.
Which I feel that in a lot of ways helped draw you in to. There are just some incredibly personal moments, and then also you took a look at all sides. There's there's a family whose young son is a victim of this racial profiling and trying to battle to get her son out of jail. Can you tell me a little bit about that and tracking that story?
Sure. Well, I there's usually not an opportunity to talk about kind of the filmmaking around this because the issues are so, fraught and immediate. But I come from a background as working as a DP for 8-10 years and on fiction films, and I was, one of the things that I never share, but that I bring to the nonfiction filmmaking now is that everything is kind of envisioned through a visual frame, and I'm always thinking first and foremost about the cinematography. Actually, can this bit of interesting access, as provocative as it is, with this certain individual, yield a scene that would feel compelling enough, that on a level that could, maybe compete with people's appetite for fiction films. And in this case in particular with this project, I felt like there was a really high bar of expectation to live up to, because I think a lot of people were coming to this issue thinking they know all about, the problems of race and policing in this country, feeling inundated by it in their social media feeds and whatnot. And so I really wanted this to kind of like blur the line of experientially, so that people felt like they're almost in like, a fiction narrative film about whistleblower cops, and then be pulled out once in a while by this reminder, like, oh no, this is all real-time observational filmmaking actually happening, so that they could be jarred into embracing a new narrative,
Well, it's a beautiful film about a difficult topic. I mean, it really is like, it felt like you were watching a thriller, just like a traditional narrative thriller at times. I mean, that's how it was just so compelling.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But in terms of being able to look at other sides of the issue, because you don't just talk about the difficulties of the cops, you look at how it affects other people who are a victim, who are the victims.
Right.
Tell me about how you gain their trust, the trust of the family whose young son, the mother whose son is just being held.
Right. Well, with Pedro Hernandez and his mother, Jessica, they were, before their story blew up in the media, in the recent months, they were fighting this battle largely unknown. And again, it's a kind of case in point example of how there's so many people out there struggling with this issue in New York City around what they feel is discriminatory practices, and yet the public only has so much appetite for this because they feel like this is a familiar narrative. And so even though Pedro's story was actually reported out in some of the local news, it never was embraced in a sustained way, because the cycle, particularly at this very moment, is kind of drowned out. I mean, there's not a lot of oxygen, left after the national media coverage has, fixated on the new Trump tweet or whatever it is. We're at a very divisive and polarized place on very big ticket issues, from immigration to race and other political, corruption stories,
right,
Russian collusion. And so these kind of more nuanced looks at the criminal justice system are just really not going to see the light of day. So I really wanted not only to have like a kind of sort of cinematic experience that might be a little bit foreign to this subject matter as an observational doc, but also create like a truly multi-character world where we were going to, in the way that like Gus Van Sant or Linklater or some of the great indie fiction directors might might radiate out of like a singular inciting moment to an unexpected, more nonlinear narrative where you're meeting one cop that hands off to another and another and another, and then you're meeting other individuals, private eye attorneys, families, kids in Rikers. And so that there was this corroborating effect that ultimately, by way of the story structure, seamlessly kind of like, bringing the viewer through multiple precincts, multiple social spaces. They would, it would be very hard to refute the claims of the film as just, well, this is one disgruntled family or one troublemaking bad apple cop, as the department often likes to say when they're faced with negative press about something. So it was, it was kind of like an interest in non-conventional story structures, but then also like a little bit of a strategic plan to make sure that we were going to also, from a journalistic standpoint, be able to say, no, there's multiple perspectives of testimony and evidence gathering that corroborate each other, and that present a very truly kind of systemic view not an individualized narrative view.
So when you're making this movie, you have no life. You have no life whatsoever.
Yeah.
Your life is effectively just, you get a call or a text. You got to be somewhere when something's happening, and so how do you even and you spent 4 or 5 years doing this. I assume you were working on other projects and juggling those as well. So I'm just trying to get a feel for what it's like to be a doc filmmaker where you're kind of the slave to where the subject is going, and there's no clear end point. It's not like you're gonna eat McDonald's for 30 days or something like that. It's like you're the subject plays out in the time frame it plays out. So how do you have a normal life if you even have one?
I say this every time I do a project. I don't know if I could ever do this again. I mean, it's horrific. Anybody who has made a film knows that it's plagued with uncertainty, financial burden. You're living off, you're expending any savings you might have had. Then you're going into debt, and you are generating more and more debt. And for years you may be gathering material, not believing you have anything, and then submitting it for grants and being rejected because others may not yet see, a proof of concept yet. And, you hear all the time, well, come back when you have more material, you have a rough cut. By the time you have a rough cut, you have basically done the body of work that goes into a project like this. And so I don't know. I mean, it's horrific, I think, trying to finish a documentary that is longitudinal scope, and also truly kind of embracing the organic unpredictability of not predetermining the storyline. It's one thing to do maybe an interview driven film where you have your cast of main subjects that you're going to get these sort of major interviews with, and then gather your B-roll and archival around, and then another to try and follow, several dozen characters around with no sense of what this story
that's the traditional
is to be.
Yeah, that's a traditional doc outline. You just outlined it. That's the format, right? But that's not the approach that you took.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in this case, it falls more to the tradition of knowing that there is something important that the public needs to sort of be able to bear witness to, and yet because it's all unfolding real time, you have to kind of come to terms with what that story will be as you learn more about it. And then, of course, the grants and any funders will want to know what your vision of that is, so you make up some story arc of what you think you're going to get, and then ultimately you're probably proven wildly wrong that it's something very different. I never would have expected to meet private investigator Gomez,
right?
And yet he was the kind of the key for unlocking the street side of the collateral damage in the communities that the quota-driven policing was creating. And how would anybody could have predicted a New York salty dog character like him with the access to so many individual stories like he had?
Yeah, he really grounded. I thought he grounded the film very well. I mean, it gave you an interesting entryway. But explain the quotas. The quotas were the thing that I found it mind-boggling to even realize that that's a thing that exists.
Sure.
But can you explain how that worked and what led the officers to push back against it?
Yeah.
Because it really led to their not advancing, or even the quotas were considered to be necessary, right, to make the department look good, so that the analytics or the stats that they can show make the department look great. So Tell me about those quotas.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There were bans on quotas in the workplace prior, but in 2010, that labor law was really firmed up, but not enough, because ultimately we learn in the film that there was no legally sustainable pathway for the officers to sue this city and the department. But more on that later. Essentially, the quota is born out of this distortion of this social theory called broken windows theory, which Commissioner Bratton brought to New York City and applied in the policing context. The idea being that if you police aggressively for low-level infractions, you'll be able to mitigate larger felony crime. The thing about that is when you try and identify, well, where are places that we should apply this kind of aggressive low-level misdemeanor policing, it's places like Crown Heights or South Bronx or minority communities where simply the public is not going to push back with the sort of the perhaps legal resources or vigor that white communities have access to. So what you see happening is over 87% of misdemeanor infractions being applied to Black and Latino communities. Recent data from the NYPD that was kind of quietly slipped out over the last several months demonstrates very quantitatively that over 5 times the number of criminal summonses are being issued in Black and Latino communities versus white for infractions that apply across the board, like marijuana use, which has been decriminalized. Possession has been decriminalized for certain amounts of possession, but there's still being summonses and arrests being made, and 9 out of 10 of those are being given to Black and Latinos, even though we all know, like, everybody smokes weed. Okay?
Right. Yes.
Whites and blacks, Latinos, everybody pretty much evenly is partaking.
It's oppressive.
And the same thing goes for open container of alcohol. Jaywalking, all sorts of misdemeanor infractions. And so when you target only certain communities, then there's greater opportunity to then potentially get something bigger, like a resisting arrest or, disorderly conduct or something else that then allows officers to, meet the quota further, be satisfying their supervisors' pressures, which ultimately tracks back to, as you're saying, demonstrating that, well, we as a department are fighting crime, and that's why we need all 36,000 uniformed officers, which is like a small occupying army in this city, requiring over $5.6 billion of annual operating budget.
Because some of these infractions, like the jaywalking and whatnot, that's like, it's like to me, it's like a shakedown. Because the jaywalking ticket is what, $100 or some
yeah, it's a racket.
Crazy. It's a racket. Yeah, exactly. It's revenue generating for the city. It's no different than, the mafia asking for protection, right? As crazy as it sounds, it's just insane that this is happening now in America, especially oppressing, because $100, okay, $100 to people in the neighborhoods that you mentioned, that's damaging to the monthly budget. So it's just horribly frustrating.
Yeah, one of the problems with this sort of over summonsing of certain communities is that summonses, I think, roughly like a third of court bench summonses that you have to appear at court to resolve will lead to arrest warrants and arrests, because people have to show up to work.
Right.
If you're going to have to cancel a shift to show up at court because you were sitting on a step and then you got a blocking pedestrian traffic summons, that could be the difference between keeping or losing your job on any particular day.
Right. Oh my God. Now, the screening at Sundance was that the first time that the subjects had seen the film in front of an audience?
Yeah, I had asked a lot of the subjects, would you want to see the film before? And all of them, at that point, we'd been filming for years, and they had put a tremendous amount of trust, so that it wasn't an issue for them to see it for the first time at Sundance. Knowing in some ways that's a little bit of a hermetically sealed environment.
Right.
We're not going to get a lot of pushback necessarily from, the
right. Well,
the
this is what I'm curious about is the reaction.
Park City.
There's in Park City. It was the film was embraced. It was it was actually very emotional Q&A because. Everyone was just so vocal, and just okay. You've been following these people, and now they're right in front of you, right? And I know you spoke a little bit, but everybody had a chance to say something. And then there was a gathering outside the theater. I believe it was the Egyptian. But also, I feel in some ways, as someone who I love really great documentaries, there's also a certain level of frustration where what can I do? I live in Los Angeles. Our police department is perfect. We've never had problems. I kid. That's not the LAPD. It's its own set of issues. But there was something. I think it was a question at the end asking what can people do? And I think. Because when you see something like this and you see this injustice happening, the first reaction is, well, what can you do?
Sure. Well, one thing about the Sundance screening was that as soon as we knew we were going to be able to premiere there, I was really focused on the idea, how do we get 20 subjects, from the 5 boroughs out to Park City, Utah, so that they can see for themselves how people would react to this and share in this really momentous kind of occasion. And
get a condo. And
get a condo.
A condo in Park City. Just the logistics of that. It's one thing to get.
Well, it was a nightmare, Chris.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I thank really so grateful to some funders who I was, kind of went back to yet again for more help to, see if they would kind of understand what the value of bringing everybody out there would be. And thankfully, to the Ford Foundation, Field of Vision, others, Tribeca, that they really understood. Yeah, no, this shouldn't just be an event for filmmakers and Park City audiences. That if anybody, all of these guys should be up there on stage.
Now, more importantly, what was the reaction from the NYPD, or has there been a reaction in light of? I almost feel you could do a follow-up, right? Since the movie screened in January to now, what?
So much has happened. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Can you fill us in?
Well, one of the crazy things was that 4 days after we got back. We were really lucky to get this Social Impact Filmmaking Special Jury Award, and 4 days right after that, the department released this internal video to all uniformed officers saying, essentially, if you're wondering, there's no quota, there never has been one, and we'll discipline anyone who does enforce the quota. And we were like, that's interesting timing for a department who has, consistently tried to avoid the issue of acknowledging any kind of quotas. And 2 weeks after that, the commissioner sends out an internal memo also saying that all uniformed officers would be required to take a mandatory no quota training. And then he also reminded everybody, there's no quota in this department. And so you're just, left to wonder, well, what is it? If there's no quota, then why are we issuing a mandatory no quota training? Of course, is the thing one wonders. And we really took that as a sign that, there's sort of this, at the very least, seeds being planted to demonstrate that, well, the issue is being addressed. Great. That's what we want. Ultimately, what we want, to answer your question, is we want this to be a point of conversation in the city. But, you can't stop there. I don't think filmmakers in this day and age right now can stop at just saying, well, we want to shed light on an issue and promote meaningful conversation. I think what we really want to see is like sustained dialogue that is targeted towards really, addressing some of the core policy issues at hand. And that's not the job of filmmakers typically, but it is our job to make sure that the film winds up in the hands of people who can make good use of it, and that we can really help create a grassroots movement around some of that.
You said it. I mean, it's kind of an admission of guilt when you say the department you have to do the no quotas training. It's like saying when you see a sign, no diving in the shallow end, someone was diving in the shallow end. Someone was diving in the shallow end, and that's why there is now a sign that says no diving in the shallow end. So the no quotas training was because there had to be some sort of quotas in place for them to be able to push back against that. So
yeah.
I just find it, because to me, doc filmmakers are doing community service effectively for the amount of money that I noticed you're not drinking champagne constantly, or you didn't you pulled up in a lift, I think, which, that you're not, limo wasn't dropping you off, right? And all I'm saying is that I feel that doc filmmakers that take on social issues are doing effectively community service and have the power to affect change. I mean, I've seen it just in the time that I've been covering indie film and going to Sundance and film festivals. I see it with certain types of documentaries. There'll be a whole flow of them. Like, God, I remember it was like maybe 15, even 20 years ago, there were a lot of documentaries about the legalization of marijuana. And now things have changed. So I feel it's almost like I'm sure this will not be the last documentary on this topic. I'm
right.
sure that there are more to come. And as you said previously, this isn't the first time you tackled this topic as a subject. So I'm curious how much has changed in the department since. It's been, 9 months or so, 8-9 months.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, has it really had, or is it just this thing that will have to continue to be, you'll just have to continue to harp on it to have some really effective change?
Well, one of the craziest things to me was that these are individuals who understood the power of using the media to try and, sustain their battle and actually achieve anything with it. And yet, with even like appearing on NBC Local and doing this big interview on TV, they were still sort of, victims of the here today, gone tomorrow news cycle, and there was no sustainable conversation ever happening about what was supposed to be and is really the biggest, most historic class action lawsuit, by for the first time ever, a group of active duty NYPD cops. Like, you don't see a group of 12 cops sue the department and sort of break the quote unquote blue wall of silence. And so I think the first order of what, to answer your question earlier, like one can do is really see this as not just a piece of entertainment or infotainment, that this is a real live issue where many things continue to persist. The retaliation against the subjects of the ones that have remained on the job, 4 have retired since, is still happening. Edwin Raymond took the lieutenant's exam after scoring 8th out of 6,000 on the sergeant's exam. Yeah. Now he scored 96 or 97% on the lieutenant's exam, should have been promoted to lieutenant, has been passed up in the last 2 classes. And a slanderous article was put out about him in the Daily News, and so there's this idea that like a really great James Baldwin quote. I think it's like, not everything that's acknowledged can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not even acknowledged. And so this is an issue that the department doesn't even want to touch or begin to address in any way. In fact, they are saying it's a non-issue because we don't have quotas.
Well, this is why I think your website is so important, which I believe is crimeandpunishmentdoc.com. If I got that correct?
Yes.
Crimeandpunishmentdoc.com, because it begs, in addition to seeing the doc, it needs to be an issue that continues to be out there. And I think, the documentary being on Hulu, the documentary continuing to be screened across the country, which if you actually want to ask for a screening, you have an organization or whatnot that has the ability to screen to an audience.
Yeah, you can request a screening on the site.
Right, you can request a public screening on the site, and I'm sure if you're in the area, you might actually even attend.
Yeah, well, I would love to, and
if it's
more interesting than me is the subjects.
Right. So that's why I think, because it was one of the things, and oddly enough, I don't know if you can hear, there's it was a fire truck. I thought it was a police officer for a moment, but
no fake news here.
Right. I just feel that seeing the doc isn't enough. It's continuing to keep up with this issue, because I think it's an important one on not just a local level in New York, but on a national level for sure. So
yeah, and I think what we really wanted to do with this film that I'm excited about was like create a kind of like filmic experience where viewers could be, for an hour and 50 minutes, be in the pocket of these really kind of rich and visceral characters that I don't think, like cinema-going audiences have spent time with in this way, where you're seeing like active duty cops get retaliated against by supervisors. You're seeing like a real, salty dog PI go out, pound the pavement, and solve crimes, all in service of trying to take on the largest, most powerful policing institution in the country today, and I think that it can't be forgotten that this idea that the department in New York City is what sets the tone for law enforcement agencies across the country, and there are many departments that take their cues from the NYPD's patrol guide. Some of them follow the procedures verbatim, and so we're not just talking about Ferguson, but we're talking about cities far and wide, and so it's like absolutely a national question, like what is the role of policing right now supposed to be like, and what are they actually doing, and why has the uniform lost some of its respect and been delegitimized? Because that's not a good thing. Like, we need police. This isn't it's not like an anti-cop film, as some people sight unseen might want to believe. We're already getting pushback, and the film hasn't even launched or is not it's reached. And people on the IFC social media are talking crazy kinds of shit about the subjects in this, not even knowing what their story is. And to me, that's really fascinating, because it really is reflective of this idea that we're at this kind of political divide, and that's so oversimplified around really important issues, and we need to make very complex work that is nuanced and comes at it from a totally different perspective. I think once you hear and see for yourself and live with these cops for years, the years that this film does, you'll get the sense that these guys, they believe that policing is important and can be so much better for cops and the community and the city at large.
Yeah, it's just such an important issue, and you touched on what I think is a larger problem that we're experiencing just as a culture, as in the world, and how we even speak to each other is if we can't learn to even have these conversations in a way where we respect people's opinions, but we're able to move it forward, we're not going to solve any problems. If we can't even learn to speak to each other on the internet. I think the film is not anti-cop at all. It gives you an insight that I think is we've never seen before. So Stephen, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and everyone should go out. Stephen Maing's Crime and Punishment. It's on Hulu. You can get more information at crimeandpunishmentdoc.com, and I'm sure there's a Twitter and a Facebook and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's all there. So
it's all there.
Yeah, please follow us, and thank you so much, Chris, for having me.
Thanks for being on the show.
The department says there are no quotas.
Well, I can tell you there are quotas in the NYPD.
Truly explosive allegations.
They're coming from police officers who are part of what's being called the NYPD 12, who filed a class action lawsuit in federal court.
This is not just another lawsuit. 12 cops willing to step up like this, because you're not going to get this again for 100 years.
Hold it for 1 quick second. Now, to record.
From the beginning, I saw how this job was. It was not about helping people, it's about numbers.
Who's targeted most? The minority community.
And all this got dismissed.
All this got dismissed.
Once you start getting arrested, it goes in your record. They're taking away jobs that they could be future lawyers, future cops.
Supervisors that are using police officers as a revenue-producing agent for the city.
This system has to change.
We all put our jobs on the line. We put everything on the line.
This is something that was placed on my desk.
You're still a police officer. And there are people in our community that don't work with police officers, period.
This is David versus Goliath. Without public support, we're nothing.
How long do you think you're going to keep the powder keg half on?
I believe in struggle, and with struggle comes change.
Can the NYPD be what cops are supposed to be?